I think, thank you. Yeah, it's all right. I think we would have to start now. It's almost 5 minutes past 12. And let me start by saying a very big thank you to all of you online and those we have in-house. And today also promises to be a very exciting series or session of the seminar series from the Institute of African Studies. And without talking too much, I would just go ahead to introduce the chair for today's event. And in our seat, we have Dr. Deborah Atobrah, who is a director for the Center for Gender Studies and Advocacy of the University of Ghana. And she is also from the Institute of African Studies. She is a senior research fellow with the Societies and Cultures section. So please let me not bother you too much. I hand over to Dr. Deborah Atobrah, who will take us through the event. Thank you and welcome once again.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abubakari. And good afternoon to our guests for this afternoon's session, our guest online, and also here in presence with us. You are very much welcome. This afternoon, we are going to have a very engaging session, and the topic is music production for everybody. That's a question. And then it also says a workshop about the gender digital gap in sound cultures. I would read the abstract and I would beg your indulgence. While digitization concerns most people in the world today, many observations show unequal social participation in the use of digital tools and practices. Inequalities that are often called a digital gap. Some social inequalities that already existed prior to digitization are perpetuated throughout processes of digitization, clearly exemplified by the steady low quota of female music producers in the global popular music. Our workshop will present exemplary cases of negotiating the digital gap in Germany, Europe, sound cultures from our research and teaching projects. In a second step, we will open up the discussion about relations of gender, culture production, digitization, specifically situated in Ghana, Africa. And so you may see that, you know, unlike our usual Thursday seminars, you see workshop featuring here. It's just to show that this is going to be an interactive session, and we would still, you know, keep to our time of ending the proceedings by 1:30. And so this afternoon, we are very honored to have our colleagues from University of Siegen in Germany to take us through this session and to share their experience and their work with us. That's a very special privilege we have now. And our presenters are Professor Florian Heesch, who is a professor of popular music and gender studies at the University of Siegen. He holds a PhD in musicology from the University of Gothenburg. His research interests include ballads, heavy metal, voice and gender, music and mythology, and popular music education. He would co-present with Leah Jung, who studied music education, musicology, educational science, and cultural studies. She works as a research assistant for popular music and gender studies at the University of Siegen, as well as on her PhD project about doing gender while making music. That is so interesting. And so, ladies and gentlemen, you have the floor. We are all very curious. I personally, I have never been struck by the fact that I haven't seen any female music producer. I know quite a number of music producers, and they are all male. And it's never struck me that this is something that I should wonder about. So this afternoon, I'm really curious to hear your presentation. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks very much for the kind introduction and for the invitation. We are very glad and really honored to be here. Thanks for having us. And so Lea and me, we would like to give you a short presentation of what we conceive of is what we consider to be the gender digital gap, right? But we're also very curious to learn and to get into conversation with all of you. So thanks to people here in the room and online for having us and for your curiosity. And we will really much hope to be in conversation. For us, it's, to be honest, it's the first time to be in Ghana. And we are really here to learn things. And so we feel in the double way honored to talk in the Institute of African Studies. For, to be honest, our contribution to today's seminar is not so much about African culture in particular, since we don't consider us to be experts in that field, rather in a broader field of cultural studies and others that have been mentioned before. So, but we are indeed very interested in learning and discussing much about Ghanaian popular music, which we think is really important also for us and for our students home. Like for Ghanaian music, from high life to hip life, but also the phenomenon of burger life. That was an interesting collaboration of Ghanaian musicians in being in Germany in the 70s and 80s. And we, as scholars in the fields of gender studies, we're always interested in aspects and questions of participation, female participation in arts and culture. And here, when it comes to Ghanaian music, I think there are so fascinating aspects and examples, as I learned from Julie Okine, who already sang together with E.T. Mensah and his Tempos band, or Paulina Orduro with her song Woman Power from 1999, or to more recent examples like Efia herself being an alumni of the University of Ghana, and other current Afropop singers like Ria Boss or Sister Deborah, or the multidisciplinary artist Poetra Asantewa. And we also have been learning, and we think that it's so interesting, not only about the art and artists from Ghana, but also about the research and scholars here. So I just recently added the work of Kwabena Nketia to my personal bibliography on critical musicology, since I think it's so interesting and fascinating, inspiring to read how he was had a vision of bringing musicology, ethnomusicology together, as well as global and local perspectives. And I think this is very actual until today. And we had the pleasure to visit the Nketia archive yesterday. Was really inspiring. And also another scholar like John Collins here from the University of Ghana, who describes in his thick overview on Ghanaian popular music, High Lifetime, the last edition from 2018, he describes the use of digital tools in the production of music as having increased enormously in the 21st century. So, and this is very interesting for us, of course, to see that also in Ghana, like in many other places of the world, the digitization brings new opportunities, but also possible new gender inequalities. And this is something, so that's broadly the thing we like to talk to you or with you today. So you see our plan for today's session in a second. So what I would like to start with is to give you some short overview on the theoretical framework our talk is based on, and we also like to think on. And then we would like to present 3 examples from our research and teaching as well about, not only exploring the gender digital gap, but also about certain interventions that happen from artists, but also from researchers. And what we think is important also here in that field to think and discuss, reflect upon collaborations of practitioners and researchers. So, and then for the third example, I will also then hand over the baton to my colleague Lea Jung, who will also present something from our most recent activities in teaching that aspect and teaching activities with our students in our university. So I'd like to start with some aspects of the theoretical framework. So, and just put here some keywords on that slide. First of all, what is post-digital societies? I think we all live in post-digital societies, meaning that digitalization not only includes processes of developing and using technologies, but also involves far-reaching social and cultural transformations, which are then captured in the term of the post-digital. And as research on cultural education in post-digital societies shows, social inequalities are not limited totally or even somewhere by the digital transformation, but sometimes they are even exacerbated. For example, studies on post-digital youth cultures in German-speaking countries point to unequal participation with regard to formal education, or rather to the access that students have to different aspects of formal education. And that leads, of course, or that is one example of what could be a gender digital gap. So I think it's also important here to point out that feminist research has been focusing on challenges and opportunities of technologies since very long time, not the least, for instance, if you take into consideration Donna Haraway's work on cyborg theory from 1985 and later on. That has been inspiring and very important. And scholars in that field have pointed out to, yes, the opportunities, for instance, in form of virtual parallel worlds that enable body independent identities to be performed. And that could be, of course, a very empowering opportunity for men and women to also extend or improve participation in different areas, cultural areas. At the same time, it can be observed that the internet also reproduces social power structures. So, in one study, Mangelsdorf and Lang described this ambivalence as a tension between utopias of participation and dystopias of all-encompassing control systems, which also go with the improve of and development of digitalization. Digital gaps, so, are current manifestations of social inequality resulting from unequal access to new information and communication technologies based on gender, region, social class, etc. Research on the digital gap points out that the ongoing digital transformation will have economically detrimental consequences for women in areas in which they participate less. And so that means if the gender digital gap is not addressed, digital technologies may exacerbate gender inequalities rather than help to reduce them. And this can, of course, be observed in many fields, and therefore we think it's very interesting to talk here also to an interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary audience. And I think that it's not only important to our field of music research, but in the field of music research that can very truly and very pointedly be seen. And Dr. Atobrah also hinted at that just observation about the very few female music producers, and also studies that refer to the situation in Western Europe confirm that the amount of female producers is less than 5%. So this is very, very little, and this is a very clear example of how the digital gap can be seen in the field of music. And since, as I said, digital tools and the use of that other, not only digital, but other technologies for producing so important, have been important since decennia, but also have been important in producing all kinds of music, even more in the 21st century in Europe, in the global north, but also in African music cultures, of course, like I said, John Collins describes with regard to Ghana, but I think it can also easily be described and seen in other the most popular music from neighboring countries like Nigeria, or take popular music from South Africa or other countries as well. So we all see that many pop songs, not only in the realm of hip hop, for instance, where it maybe has its origins, are produced, so the instrumental part is produced electronically, where beat making has gained an important role, and that is a field that is both, it's very opening. There are new opportunities also to get into that without formal education in music. You just have to have a laptop and you get free.
To receive the public affairs, we need to go and deliver it to the VC. You see the way living life as if it was student. You will not know that it's living life.
Okay, shall I just continue maybe? Okay, so just saying that is an important field, and we see how the clear gender imbalance in that field. Which of course is a challenge to deal with. And there are certain approaches also, not only to observe statistically or in other ways of description, but also to think about interventions that are possible from also collaborations of researchers and practitioners. And I think, to me, one very inspiring book is that of Anne Balsamo, who herself she's a scholar who also worked in the Silicon Valley for a couple of years, and she's very experienced in being one of very few females in a high technologized world. And she wrote a very fascinating book called Designing Culture, where she explained her approach to what she calls for hermeneutic reverse engineering. That means the active use and reuse of technology, and in an analytical way also with regard to its cultural, social implications, but to deal with that in new alternative ways that then enhance also participation also for more women. Could we go to the next slide, please? And because I just here have a nice quotation from Balsamo's book for you, where she describes the transformative potential of researching and teaching the use of digital technologies. I would not read the whole quotation here, but she also refers to the important role of the universities in that regard, where she says that the digital humanities have been one of the domains within the universities that has embraced the imperative to develop research questions that address social issues. So it's also about finding new research questions and how important it is to develop new questions. This approach should also be understood as transformative, because the project is designed to explore new possibilities and new social arguments. And further on, one of the major impacts of transformative research in the digital productions is a reconfigured understanding of the nature and structure of multidisciplinary collaboration in the university. So I think it is very inspiring also to read about that of course we do want to do more research, and we do want to develop new projects also internationally on that, but we also think it's very interesting and important to look at what is actually already been done by practitioners, by artists and other practitioners who are doing things to deal with that gender digital gap we are trying to get hold on here. So now we are just going to our examples, I think, and I will present the first one of that. I just put it under the title, How Participation in Metal Music is Increased by Use of Digital Tools. And it's interesting since the field of hard rock and heavy metal at least in the global north, but also in cultures, heavy metal cultures in, for instance, South America, etc., and many fields of countries of the world where you have strong and large metal music scenes. Everywhere you can see that there is a minority of women who are active on stage. Many times as singers, and that for many years, like in all genres, you know, the role of the female singer has rarely been questions with certain and important, of course, other contexts, like my colleague and PhD student Yalda Yaziani presented with reference to Iran, for example. So that also happens, but when it comes to instrument playing, like electric guitar, for instance, or drums, the picture is quite different, and we see really a minority of female artists in that field. And what was interesting and what's happening during the pandemic, that a group of female metal musicians gathered together and formed that project called Chaos Rising. And today, Chaos Rising is an international project with more than 30 female musicians from 20 countries, creating music covering a multitude of metal genres. And so the number and also the number of countries involved has increased since their foundation in 2019 till today. They put bands together, different bands in different genres. They play together by use of online tools and produce their music in that way. They have also distributed their music mostly online. Just recently, they also started to publish a first album called The Singles, where they put together several of their online produced songs. And I think it's very interesting also how to learn how these women experience that network. So luckily, we could invite some of them to a workshop we did in 2021, some of the musicians active in Chaos Rising. And it was very interesting how they presented their perspective and how important that project was and is to them. Like one female metal vocalist, and being a member in 2 bands, she said that she had never worked with other female musicians before, just bands like all-female bands. So that project gave her the opportunity to do so for the first time. And she describes Chaos Rising as the most appreciative and supportive group she had been part of it. So, and this is of course an important aspect, like with and we know that also historically from, for instance, the Riot Girl movement in the US in the 1990s, but also far more back in history and in many other contexts, that it is sometimes important in cultural production that women find their own rooms. And for us as men, it's important also to respect that, because it obviously is something different, or it offers certain other opportunities. And here, obviously, some of these women experience Chaos Rising as important just because of that. As I said, there is also a lack of legitimacy and visibility for women in metal. So Chaos Rising just offers an opportunity for women to get involved in making metal music on all levels, playing all instruments, producing songs, doing video editing, etc. And thus the group allows women to teach each other also and share their technical skills. So not being dependent on the gender imbalance in technology, also in the knowledge about technology. That's also important here. And a third also important aspect that another musician told us about was that given that she has a family at home, and so she does not have so much time to commit to being in a band full time, to go to rehearsals, drive to rehearsals, etc., to concerts very much. But with that digitally organized project, she was able to do that and could actually be active in the first place in the metal scene, which also I think is very, very inspiring here. So I think this, in that regard, that project is a very fascinating phenomenon to be studied, and I would also be very curious to learn more about other projects that exist wherever in the world too, and it's also important to spread the knowledge about that, and also to tell the history of interventions like these. Our second example is a little bit more complicated or complex. And here we have been using a methodology called a situational analysis developed by Adele Clark, who is a US-American sociologist coming mostly from the field of health study. And we think that her methodological framework for doing qualitative studies is very interesting to grasp the complexity of situations that involve many different people and social groups, but also aesthetics aspects, also technologies, etc., and the use of technology also, because situational analysis was also very much inspired by STS, science and technology studies, etc., with regard to their cultural and social impacts. And just some more words on the situational analysis in a second, but here I just want to introduce a female DJ from Berlin. I have just put a blind thing on her eyes because she's an anonymous informant, but she was kind to give a very long interview also on what she did. And she's actually a pioneer in the Berlin hip-hop scene, and also is more particular in the use of digital tools in that field. So as many of you are certainly aware of, the production of hip-hop beats or traditionally has been by using turntables and multiple turntables and mixers, etc. So, and since around 20 years, many more tools occur that to some extent replace the use of turntables or our alternatives. So use of laptops is more easy, is even more affordable to many more kids and adults. And she is really, really good in doing this stuff. She also wrote handbooks on certain software in that field. And but she also describes in the interview that it was not always easy to find her position in the scenes, in the music scenes where she was active in. And but then there was obviously one moment where she used her digital tools in a kind of contest-like session, open mic session, and then she had this triumphant moment that she describes, like you can see the quote here: "All these boys at the open mic sessions have shut their traps when I was playing the track, and it suddenly became loudly out of the speakers, because I just could do it, because I was able to go beyond records with my technology." So she describes that really as a kind of empowerment aspect. Also a little bit, it's a little bit not only nice, she also performs being a fighter, also against the male dominance in that field. And that brought me also to think about what happens here, that this is not just easy. It's not just, okay, yeah, she's welcome, she's doing something else, and she has success, everybody is nice. No, it's not always like that. The other ones were not always nice to her, and she does not always react nice to what she experienced with this male-dominated group. So therefore, this tool of situational analysis helps to describe what happens here as a social arena. With that, Adele Clark, the developer of that methodology, refers to Anselm Strauss here, American sociologist, he describes that many things in society happen without real consent of all people. So when you have new developments in politics, in culture, in society, and people have different interests, it is rather rarely that everybody finds a consent where we say, okay, 100% of us agree upon it. And rather, on the other hand, in most cases, it is like things are negotiated and you have a minority and a majority or so, if it's democratic. And if it's democratic, the majority would win like that. But it says that it's then also clear that this is not totally bad, but people, human beings can deal with that. And we all do it, I think, on our daily level and also in where we are active in the university, maybe also in politics and wherever, that we have negotiations to do. And it's sometimes conflicts of interest, but that's quite natural to people. And I think it's very interesting and powerful tool to describe what has happened here. And I tried with the use of that mapping strategies by Adele Clark, I tried to describe and that in this way that DJ A, you see her very tiny in the middle, is being standing, so to speak, or is situated in two different arenas. One is the arena of women's participation in DJing. So in the first place, she was one of the very few women in early 2000s who were active as DJs in the Berlin hip hop scene. And that was one arena where she had to struggle. And there, when you see then how many different social worlds are also involved here, you see that that is a difference of the hip-hop scene in Berlin is not the same as certain alternative hip-hop scenes that also exist, where that maybe sometimes have a certain feminist or other political activist approach to the field. But that's not self-evident. They have different interests. Also, music labels have different interests here. Then there are indeed networks of feminist activism who have certain interests, etc. And also DJing historians sometimes tend to describe the history of DJ without naming any woman at all, even though some of them exist. So I think we as researchers, also being historians of music sometimes, or other arts, also contribute to how a field of cultural participation is negotiated. And then I don't go into every detail here, but just to mention the other one, there is the arena of digital DJing, meaning that also this is that how this DJ had to find her way and how she wanted to negotiate. Okay, it is not that much used to use digital tools and laptops. Most of these guys, the boys at the open mic sessions, they still think turntables are the one and only tool that is allowed to use since a certain codex in traditional hip hop. But when using it, she experienced also now she could play she had many more possibilities to play even tracks by other musicians. And this is this empowering moment that she was describing. And in a certain kind of fighting way, as I said. And this is why I think it's very fitting or suitable here to describe that as in a certain arena, meaning not a physical fight, of course, or not a real war or something like that. It's not about aggression, but it's about this kind of social negotiation that happens here in that musical culture. With that, I would finish my second example, and I'll hand over the baton to Leah.
Yeah, thank you so much. And also thank you for the warm welcome at your university here. So I continue with another example, which is connected to our teaching activities in the university. So we try to connect all this research and also this project that already existing with the teaching. And so I will give you a brief introduction to that and then go deeper into the example of the seminar that was happening this winter term. So like we already heard, there are only 5% of female music producers all around the world. And coming from that, many of them have big struggles with that. And this led to the founding of a network called Female Pressure. You see the name there, and it's an online network since 1998. So I think quite early for electronic music. It's evolving in these days more and more and gets more popular. And this network is for us now quite old. And it's an international online network with a database, so you can search for producers or DJs in this database, so to get more visibility for them, but also to connect with each other. And it's for women and non-binary people. And for all of them working in electronic music, in the realm of visual arts. And like it said, it's international, but I think there's also this issue with a bigger amount of people from the global north interacting with that, and also a little bit of struggle to get connections all over the world running. But I checked on the weekend, and there's one female producer from Ghana, so maybe it's also interesting for us to reach out while we're here. Yeah, and this network is some of the, how to say, the connecting point for many of them, but of course they also meet in person and they all have relationships on different levels with each other. And two of them were thinking about how we could get more females into making music. So how could we help with that? And these two activists started a workshop series in already 2007, where basic knowledge regarding the technical issues of digital audio workstations, in this case, the program Ableton Live, maybe you know it, and that was learned in 2 weekends. So it was like a kickstart workshop to get people into it. And these workshops are called Remix Regendered, and sadly they stopped last year. So there's no more funding for that right now. So yeah, I think we know all these cases. So these workshops provided an exclusive space for women only and were held in Cologne. So by using digital tools and resources to increase participation and facilitate entry, the gender digital gap was being addressed in 2 ways. Firstly, thematically and content-wise, by relevant skill sharing and empowerment. But secondly, by also using male-dominated digital tools, male-connotated digital tools in a feminist way, and intervening these connotations by that. We ourselves try to include these topics and interventions in these academic courses too. So since 2020, Florian Heesch offers seminars at the University of Siegen that focus on gender mainstreaming, equality, and digital music production. And since I'm organizing online workshops like Remix Regendered myself in my spare time, so I'm joined into it and took over one of the seminars in this winter terms. And this is the seminar I want to focus on now. So these seminars are aimed at students of social work. So they're not studying music, they're studying social work. And on the one hand, it offers opportunities for cultural education for the students themselves, so getting into music production. But these students could also become effective as multipliers in their work context later on. If they establish a sensitivity for the topic of a gender digital gap, this could also shape their further work. So by addressing an all genders group in these seminars, this differs from the workshops I mentioned before. So to raise awareness and to address the male dominance we see in music production, I try to create an awareness for power structures among the participants about gender and other differentiations, to create a space where internalized communication structures could be reflected and trained to be avoided. So we had also 2 workshop weekends with the 2 practitioners, the activists I mentioned before, where the students could learn basic knowledge. of working with a digital audio workstation. And this led to a live performance in a local club in Siegen, and you can see a picture of that. And yeah, we had a little event, a little performance on the last day, and invited some friends and family for that. So it was for the students a big thing to just have 2 weekends working into and then going on stage. The theoretical sessions took up topics and issues that we have outlined here at the beginning. So like the underrepresentation of women in music production, canonization processes that exclude people from the historical records, media representations, and also intersectional discrimination. In particular, it was interesting to discuss aspects of the text by Hopkins Berkers that Florian mentioned also before, because it describes learning spaces for music production, and which is exactly what we found ourselves in at that time. So the special reflexive level, which could arise from this, offered the possibility on the one hand to deepen thoughts about this study, but also on the other hand to reflect our own actions in this space. So this included talks and reflections about processes of tokenism, if you are the only one representing a marginalized group, feelings of isolation, or issues navigating in male-dominated spaces, sexism and sexual harassment, the overrepresentation of male teachers in technical subjects, and biases considering stereotypes and connotations that shape our doing in this field. In addition, reflections on one's own positioning played an important role. For this purpose, we dealt with the anti-bias approach in order to make our own biases visible in the first place. Since the students, like I mentioned, maybe will work in a pedagogical field, we also discussed possibilities to work with heterogeneous groups to be able to create more safer spaces, not to say safe spaces, and to be able to use their own positions in an intervening way, like, for an example, using your own privilege for power sharing. So we titled it Feminist Interventions, and we also discussed in the last days that we could also frame these seminars as an intervention themselves. So I think there are on several levels some interventions going on in the seminar series. Considering the quote we saw before, following Balsamo's suggestion of multidisciplinary collaborations, we try to integrate this hard word for me, practitioners more often in university lectures. On the one hand, this provides technical expertise we couldn't have ourselves and also experience. But furthermore, this provides an exclusive insight into cultural practices of people, in this case, particularly women working in music production. So we also could include their expertise on being activists since 30 years. And I think it's quite impressive to talk to people that are doing this work for so many years. The connotations of technology being male are addressed by that too. By having an only women team teaching the technical aspects of the workshop, the otherwise male-dominated space was intervened. And it was quite interesting to watch that, how people interacted, for example, with me, and how they considered that I have knowledge about technical issues. And just to spoiler, they didn't expect I had any expertise in anything in technology. So it was quite interesting, and also having the opportunity to talk about that too was really good to get in communication, like, whoa, I thought it would be different. And yeah, I think it's a good learning space for that. Yeah. And also we tried to combine practical and theoretical knowledge. So the practical knowledge provides the possibility of an involvement at a different level by getting to know a cultural practice by doing it yourself. And also it offers a special opportunity for reflection on the theoretical knowledge at that point. So now I want to include a statement of a student pointing out the potentials of art education for social work and questions about participation at that point. So here you can read with me. In social work in particular, arts education is always a social project that helps initiating individual and social development processes. This is connected to the paradox of the arts being positioned between distinction and understanding on the one hand, and offering potentials for new connections on the other hand. That potential can be used for contributing to improved social participation. So the student points out that there are potentials for improving participation. And I think considering the gender digital gap, where Florian got us the introduction in, there arise questions like, how can the emancipatory potential of digitalization could come to play if it's now not that case at some points, or how can exclusions be avoided? But also considering spaces, how can digitalization improve participation in more rural areas, like music production, sometimes it's called a more urban activity and centers around urban areas at some point. And maybe if something shifts more into digitalization, we could imagine that rural areas could have a better access to that. So, like you heard a little bit of the concept and also the experiences with the seminar, but also I want to give a short glimpse into the product that come out of it and a more like the artistic outcome. And I brought an audio example of a track that a student created in my seminar, and I want to a little bit frame it before we hear it. So for this female student, the seminar was the first time trying out to make music herself. So she never tried singing, she never played any instrument. And this means we will hear the product of 2 weekends working with a digital audio workstation without any past experiences. I will go into that right now. Because I want to point out that it wasn't her first contact to the cultural practices of electronic dance music, since she is participating through attending events, dancing, and hearing, and knows several people that produce music like that. And to be more precise, several people means at this point several men producing music, and she never known a female before. So she positioned herself as a part of a techno scene by mentioning this information, but also this prior knowledge was apparent, for example, through knowledge of track structures or often used sounds, which is also audible in the track. I will now give you a glimpse of some associations and connections we could see in this, or maybe more here in the track. On the more technical side, we can hear that she explored techniques and practices in this remixing project, like sampling, looping, and modulations through playing with panning or velocities. So this is a remix project that means that there is this track Rose of Elisa Metz, the lowest row, and Asya Osolin, the student, got all these stems, they are called, from the track to work with. So you have the sounds and you can work with that. And so that was maybe, of course, a technical side of it. But furthermore, her choice of the title Female Alien allows associations and reflections on the gender issues we debated in the seminar. By thinking about the title, we could also think about the alienation of female or an othering of females, maybe even referring to cyber theories like Florian mentioned before, and the hyper-transgression of people and machines we could read about in Donna Haraway's writings. We will also hear a little bit of the play with voices in this track and modulating the voices of the track that got remixed. So I will say former female voice from the other track, from Rose, gets alternated, distorted, modified, and destructed. And I think we could hear this as a connection to the title. So we have now 1.5 minutes to get a glimpse into it. And after that, we will end with our presentation part and are happy to get in contact with you all and go into discussion.
Actually wanted more music. Yeah, so this is really good. And I won't try to summarize because I cannot. I was just, enjoying the presentation and kept reflecting on a number of the issues you raised on, the social power structures that underpin the low participation of women in music production. And it's still very, shocking to me because I had never thought about it. Although I have many music people in my circle, and I know people who are music producers and all of that. I had never thought about the fact that there are so few women. I don't know any woman or any female in music production, but then it's not just the fact that there are few women in music production, but the circumstances that, supports this phenomenon. And I was also kind of struck by how that also is framed around female usage of technology. So it seemed very much like a, double-edged sword. There are very few women in technology. Women are not usually introduced to technology early. And even in this era of, COVID and kind of post-COVID, and many things are done using technology. And we know that women could mobilize on social media. And so they are able to use technology to a great extent. But at the same time, when it comes to certain areas, we see some kind of exclusion. And how does it all happen? It's really something that's I was shocked by. I also thought very much about, the whole music value chain and the roles women play. And I'm saying this, bringing it to our context, in Ghana and maybe in Africa. And how, even when it comes to how instruments are used, and being also familiar with Yalda's work and how she, plays the instruments and applies it to her research and all of that. We know that generally women are also excluded from maybe casually playing certain instruments, and so music in different categories also allow women into the spaces in different ways. For instance, the talking drum, are women allowed to play it in all contexts? And even when we move to Northern Ghana, where there are, traditional drummers, and it's like a traditional institution, who then is the drummer? And are women allowed into those spaces? Because the whole value chain of music, and then it gets to production and it gets to contemporary music. So I was just thinking about all of these. And I also reflected on, the how neoliberal economic framework or principles also are applied. And quite similar to sports. How would, for instance, patrons see the work of women, and just knowing that this thing is produced by a woman? It's just like sports. It's a female match. Do I want to pay and go and watch? And in that same way, how do I want to patronize? And does it also influence how women participate? So these are kind of my own, questions that I was asking myself. Yeah, but I think that it's such a compelling area to look at. and even methodologically, you know, how we, you know, frame inquiries around these, and being in the minority, what kind of techniques do we use also to get the kind of knowledge that we want to get from it? Because there may be so much that the very few women who are involved, they have to tell the rest of the world. And what kind of feminist methodological techniques do we have to use in such instances? And so with these few remarks, maybe long, somewhat, I would open the floor, and also our online floor is also open. And we'll take chats, and if you raise your hand, we would also invite you. You can unmute, and then we have some conversation around this. And the floor is also open. You just need to raise your hand, and then would ask you to make a remark. Okay, so we'll take 3 questions, comments at a time, and then you have the opportunity to respond. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is very exciting and very revealing. My name is Senyo from the Department of Dance Studies. I kind of look at you read my mind in relation to the product. So I wanted to ask the question in relation to looking at it 2 ways: process and then product. So for music making, in Ghanaian context, I think it is global as well. And you made a mention to hip hop. So there are music signatures or production signatures. So you're able to identify producers by the kind of beat that they produce. So as a product, is it similar, as Dr. Atobrah mentioned? Are we able to identify this production as a feminine signature? If it is not relevant, then that means it's not relevant. But maybe probably it may be relevant. I don't know, but you probably have to give us an idea. So if you look at it as a product, are we able to distinguish a kind of signature that when we hear, like this beat that she played to us, is it easily identifiable that this is a feminine production or a masculine production? And then also as a process, I mean, coming back to our context, like Dr. Atobrah mentioned, in a minority, in the indigenous settings, some musics are categorized. It kind of looks like women produce some kind of music. Typically in the Ashanti, you have Nyomkro, which is more feminine, producers of that. For the talking drum and then the others, it kind of like falls within the masculine domain. And by convention, tradition does not kind of give that room space for that to happen. So, and I don't know whether that also stems from that limitation or that kind of subversion for women to come in, which will translate into the digital space. Then for us in our context, I don't know whether it will be because of access to technology, which is not very available at the very early stage. Now, when you're bringing it down into the contemporary stage in the digital space as well, then we see whether these are able to translate, because if you pick it from our traditional roots, then we're able to transpose it maybe into our contemporary roots. So I don't know whether those are the areas that you could also probably look at in terms of the categories of music that we produce here in Ghana. Typically, maybe for gospel music, you see that sometimes you tend to find a lot of women doing gospel music, maybe comparatively to men, although maybe now the numbers may be matching up. But when it comes to even indigenous music, there are certain kind of categories that women produce music in that area. So I don't know whether that also becomes a factor and if that transposes into the digital space. But I think my main one is when you come to the digital space, in terms of looking at it as a process and a product, the product, do we have signatures? Like if I hear the beat of Dre, I know that is a beat of Dre. If I hear the beat of Jay-Z, I know that is a beat of Jay-Z. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other? Or you want to take this and also my own reflection as I'm sure people are thinking of what.
No, maybe,
Yeah.
maybe if it's okay, I can
Okay, there's an online. Is
Okay.
it a hand or a question? Sorry. Okay, so Nancy, we've seen that you've raised your hand. Please unmute and then you make your submission.
Right. Thank you so much for such an insightful presentation. I really enjoyed it. I was so keen to my phone. I didn't want to miss any bit of it. Thank you so much. I am particularly interested in anything technology, so I was really happy to be part of this presentation. You mentioned that there's 5% of female producers who are also struggling in many facets of their work. And I'm just curious to know, and per what my brother just said, I want to pick it from the product point of view. In terms of their products and their productions and all that they are doing, how attractive is their work to other young women or women in general for them to, be more attracted into this area of production to become more producers? Are their work, the 5% people, are their works attractive enough for more people to venture into music production? And being 5%, I want to ask, how are they staying relevant in this male-dominated industry? I'm just curious to know. Thank you.
Yeah, please go ahead and then respect. Maybe just
Shall we just start with these questions? Okay, thank you very much for these very good and interesting questions. Yes, about signature, what Senio brought up, it's a very good question. So are we able to distinguish certain signature? I think that's to me that's an open research question, to be honest. But what I don't know if I understand you right at that point, but to me something that is also involved here is the question of, is there a kind of female style of writing, right? Something like that. And this is, of course, a question that feminist researchers have dealt with since many years now. So the French feminist scholar Louise Iragaray coined the term of écriture féminine, like something like, a certain type of female authorship. And that is what I think your question connects to that. And as far as I understand it, that's a highly contested debate, actually, because on the one hand, something like a distinguishable female style in producing could be a certain or imply certain moments of empowerment. On the other hand, it would also imply a certain essentialist idea of, this is music for women or by women for women. And sometimes, I think it's very important for us here as academics not to judge about, because if female producers would like to do it, so of course it is important also to respect that, and it has that function of being a role model. And to also maybe developing new things. And it might very well be that I think that was also Irigaray's idea, that women could contribute to productions that then broaden the scope of what we are used to read, hear, watch, whatever in culture, because maybe there is a certain limitation when most products that we know are only authored by men. So yes, so I would only answer with an ambivalence here. And then I also think your point with, okay, I know the signature above Jay-Z, etc. This is of course very interesting. And I think here I think it would be fascinating to do a research project on, for instance, the few Ghanaian producers maybe that we don't know yet, or not that well. enough to say something substantial about, but that could easily be done. Like, or what, not easily. It's really a challenge, of course, to describe what is the personal signature of that producer. But what you hint to is that there is a link, of course, to the questions of authorship and production, not only instruments but also authorship, and this very important addition here, that it's not only technology but yeah, and that's something, of course, for us interesting to learn, since I mean, in Europe or the Western world, there has been a very, certainly in music history, there is a very strong idea of authorship, composition being a male area. That is not in all genres the same, and not in all places of the world, and that's something I think is interesting.
Maybe I just add a little note to that question, but more from my research and not from that what I was presenting here. And like I said, my research is mostly based on musicians, but also talking with activist networks. But to just frame that, talking with musicians, and I think we could link that to producers, some female musicians. I think the ambivalence that Florian describes is not so from also our academic view on that, but also at the view of the participants. So I think there are opinions that I want to be seen as a female musician, and also there are female musicians that want to be seen as musicians and don't want to get highlighted their gender every time. And I think that's a common thing we see in journalism. So if you read an article about a female musician, it is mostly highlighted that there's this gender, and this isn't highlighted in an article about a male musician. So there is this normalization of that. Yeah, and I think this ambivalence goes through all that levels, and I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, that is maybe a very, very good addition also to Nancy's questions about that how attractive is their work, and that could also be, again, for some, it is very important to have role models. Yeah. And we know that from other fields, like I said, for instance, in heavy metal music. So I also did some studies there on the role of very few female singers who use extreme metal vocals, for instance, and it's you can indeed observe that for some younger than singers or growlers or whatever practice they do, it is important that there is somebody who has done it before, for somebody who is can work as a role model. But it's not the same for every girl or woman to have that, but I think we don't have to underestimate that aspect as well.
Thank you. My name is Atobrah from the Theatre Arts Department. I've heard a lot about framing and frame. And the lady you have used frame a lot to describe your students, you know, in terms of being the first time and in the social studies and coming into the arts, you know, at space to participate. How did you feel when they framed you as not somebody who is not knowledgeable to share and even participate? How did that affect or position you to be able to impact to them?
Thank you for that question. It's okay. We just collect. Okay, then I just noted down.
Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. I'm just wondering, with the interventions that you mentioned, whether you have observed any successes or outcomes of those interventions. Thank you.
Yeah, like I said, interesting question and also a challenging question and also challenging situation in teaching. I think it is linked to be questioned. A question, is it an English word? That I question your knowledge or you question your position to be in front of and teaching. And in this case, we were 3 women, I think. And for me, I was the host. I invited them, and I also were accountable for the theoretical sessions. And I think they never questioned my theoretical knowledge because they saw me as a research fellow, yeah, and being positioned there. But on the technical side, I think I had the attitude to that to watch it and reflect on it. I think I saw a development in that before reacting to that. And in our last feedback session, we opened up this, and I said, maybe we should talk about that. You questioned that I could answer that. And yeah, but of course it isn't that the most comfortable situation to maybe you can fall into reactions like proving yourself or just dropping something so though they can see you in another way. But I think since we were 3 people, it was a little bit more relaxed for me at that point. Yeah, but thanks for this question.
Yeah, maybe I can say something to the other question. Thanks for this as well. Yes, I think, yeah, I like your question very much because it allows us to point out that we see this whole as really kind of workshop-like or a work in progress, like that is, we do have some findings, but even more we see here a need, a desideratum for more research to be done. And our main point is here that studies like by Hopkins workers are important, that kind of describe and observe how is the ratio of females and males in certain musical practices, etc. But at the same time, we think it's also important to take into consideration that things are already happening. So like that there are already interventions going on. And for instance, Chaos Rising was not at all an academic project. It was just female musicians who, under the conditions of the pandemic, decided, let's do something together online because it doesn't go on otherwise. And now, as I tried to describe a little bit, it's not only that they found a way to cope with the pandemic circumstances, but even more. So it developed as a project that brings together female musicians in a field where they had not that standing before, from many different countries, and doing music in a way that they couldn't do otherwise. So not only also when pandemic is over like that. I think this is a very good success that just is there, and we have just can describe it, and we're it's maybe also teach it as something that is happening also to students. Like, okay, you see, there are activists, musicians who do it like this, and they are actively doing something for changing the situation in a certain field. And also, I would say that our teaching, we dare to try to say there is success in it, in so far as we see students are writing very interesting and very deep going theses or student works, and we see how important or they describe that that seminar was really kind of, they described themselves as being empowered, for instance. And I think that is also very important success in we can reach as academics. And then what we would like to do is actually to do, maybe that's more for something for the future, to do a long-term study to see what what kind of interventions can lead to successes and what is needed. So for instance, our university is located in it's a city, about 100,000 people living in Siegen, but it's a very, very big area around that is more rurally organized. It's also industry, but many people live in villages. So German villages, maybe being different from Ghanaian villages. Anyway, it's villages, it's more village culture, not that urban culture like places like Berlin or so, or Accra, of course. And so, and we also see that it's like, you know, these interventions like female pressure and others, they happen mostly in urban centers, Vienna, Berlin, Paris, etc., but rarely in like these urban areas. And we think we see a need here for also to study it in a long-term perspective. What kind of interventions could we possibly also contribute to, or where could we just follow people who are already doing things, observe and describe that to, and then, like you say, it's very important to describe what comes out of that. So thanks very much.
Yeah, and just a little addition. Also, if we talk about success, we have to think about what is the goal. So I have to think about what's the goal of my seminar, and maybe connecting to the question before, maybe this little interruption of they saw me as not into technology. Maybe this is something that raised sensitivity. And like I said before, with working with social work students, I would really like that a more sensitivity for communication or internalized associations we have with each other is raised. So I think maybe to bear with the situation that it is a little bit of rupture between it, was also contributing to getting to the goal. But how big is the goal is also the question. And in addition, from my research with activist networks, of course, these questions are really big for people working like 30 years as an activist and also struggling. So to always have the energy for that while the life is going besides that. So it's a really good question to see what could be success and how could the process go on. And yeah.
So we'll take the last round of questions. Do we have any hands up online? Okay. So, okay. So,
thank you. I'm Gideon. Okay, thank you. I'm Gideon. You talked about working with social work students, and you sort of trying to teach them how to use their privilege in power sharing. What did that look like, or what do you envision when you see or when you couch that that particular concept? What exactly were you trying to accomplish?
Okay. Let me just add a quick one.
Yeah.
So why social work student?
I'm not used that we collect questions, so sorry, I'm just always reacting. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
No, it's just a follow-up to that
Yeah.
one. So why social work students? Why in particular that group? Could it be any other group, or there is something unique about this particular set of students?
Maybe you answer.
let me add a final one. So in your research, did you notice that the roles women play also affected them in how they participated in music production and all of that? Considering that, I mean, from the little I know, it's very time intensive, and many music producers work, you know, way into the night and spend so many hours producing music. And if we were doing this in Ghana, I imagine that gender roles would definitely mediate participation, but I don't know how it played out in your situation. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, maybe the first question is, so this is just one of our teaching portfolios that we have many students in social work, and we also have a module in cultural education, and we thought it's very good fitting to do seminar also with these students. But we also had other seminars where we combined these students together with students of music. Particularly also for future teachers studying education. And I think, and this is also something we are just working on in our music institute. We were just in the next months or so, we will have a new junior professor for digital, who is also going to teach more composition and with digital tools, something like that, because we see how urgent the need is also in schools for develop that. And what is, I think, what is interesting and always a challenge in that regard is for us to combine people, like Lea said, heterogeneous groups with different, pre-knowledge they bring with us. There are many things to say, but maybe this is a very quick answer. And the second one is just, I think I don't have a really substantial answer to this yet, but I think it's just a very good question. What happened and how important is the time factor here? Sometimes it could, to a certain extent, it's thinkable that just that you could do a lot of this work at home with your own laptop. That facilitates some things. On the other hand, it's like you say, you also do need to have the time and spend it. So there's always two sides of the coin here, and this is something we would love to explore in future research.
No, is this question? Yeah, and also I don't have any research-based answer through these work circumstances. But for example, one of the practitioners in the workshop also has a child, and she's alone. She isn't married, and of course, she told me that of course it changed all her work. And she was a really active DJ in the 90s, so going to clubs on every weekend through whole Europe and also globally. So how could that be possible with having to take care for a child without a social network helping, not social networks like social media, helping you with that? So I think it's a quite good question. And to this more question about awareness and sensitivity. On the one hand, I always try to work to create a code of conduct in the first seminar session, so we could all get in contact and say, what do we need here? How could we communicate? And what do we do if anything happened that someone makes uncomfortable? So because I think if you don't talk about it before, it gets more difficult to, in a conflict, then do that. And of course, regarding power structures, so I have the positioning as being the person in front of, and it's also, we have to discuss how we could work together with that, of course, and also like reading the Prüfung? Yeah, and doing the exams and something like that. So we do music and go to a club together and and dance, and in 2 months I'm doing your exams. So it's also negotiating. And since I'm really happy that I found this anti-bias approach. I don't know if you are familiar with that. And just you try to get your biases visible at the first point, to just you have the chance to work on that. So when we don't know what our gender associations are, we couldn't work on that. But of course, it is a challenge, and it's also a challenge for me as a white person with many privileges, and also with the university position. It's also a privilege contributing to that. And I think at some points, maybe it is for students of color, another experience with me talking with them. But of course, I couldn't skip that topic because it's important that we get in contact with that and that we try to see our problems behind that. And for example, we talked about messages in our heads we had from our childhood. So what was said to us about these and these people, and also to just see what are my privilege. So I think there is a little blindness for white privilege, and also in Germany, of course, and just to get you into contact with thinking about that you have power and you could use it, and you can use it also as a social worker. At some point you have power too. You have people that come to you and they're a little bit dependent on you not at some point, they are dependent in some circumstances. So I think that was my aim, to get more desensitivity into that.
Thank you very much. Okay, so yeah, we'll take that burning question and then we get a brief response for her.
Yeah. Thank you. My name is Agnes from the Institute of African Studies. First, I thank you for that insightful presentation. My question has to do with the notion of digitization. Presently, that whole idea about digitization has been presented as something that enhances productivity. So in all spaces, including government, they have been actually touting the idea that everybody accepts it. But in some other spaces, the same notion has been seen as limiting social contact. And so that makes the presentation striking, especially in relation to female participation in music production. But I would like to find out, has your study so far revealed any limitation, any disadvantage due to the use of digitization in music productivity or production? Thank you.
Maybe very short answer, a quick answer would be, yes, because there is an ambivalence between, on the one hand, we see an increase of importance of the use of digital tools in music production overall and in many genres. At the same time, on the other hand, the number of female producers is still very low. So that shows that the situation dramatizes a little bit in the similar way like you're describing about. So, and this is why we think that is so important to take a look on this aspect of how digitalization also partly exacerbated certain social inequalities.
Okay, so I think it's been great. Shall we give our presenter a round of applause? I personally, like the fact that your work is actionable, and, in addition to the research component, you also do the intervention through the workshops where you also provide, support, and you create sensitization and all of that. And I think there's so much for us to learn from, even as students and people who are also doing research in one field or another. Thank you very much for coming and for making this very provocative presentation. And I'm sure some may want to interact with you after the session. And so, I mean, you can feel free and speak to the presenters even after we have closed. Thank you to our online participants. Thank you for attending and thank you for engaging. Any announcement for next week?
Yeah. So thank you once again for joining us both in-house and online. And next week we have, even not next week, not just Thursday, we have a graduate symposium from 15th to 16th. So this is a co-event organized by the Institute of African Studies and then Howard University in the US. So yeah, it will be a graduate symposium between our students and then their students. And this takes place on 15th and then 16th. The announcement will be sent out, so you will get to hear more about it. Thank you. And I think there is a question online. Where can I get a copy of this interesting session? So with the permission of the presenters, we are going to send a YouTube link of what has taken place today. So please, if your email is part of our list, then you are definitely going to receive that. And everybody on our mailing list will equally get access to that. So thank you very much for participating, and we expect to see you again next week. Thank you.